the confusion that goes on in their
Well,
mind?
I think one of the things is to recognize that the expectation you have for yourself going into an event versus the reality of your performance does have a lot to do with how you feel about yourself and how you think of yourself, right? So you go into an experience expecting that you're going to be a hero, and the best you manage to do is you survive. I tell the story a lot in my training about I've never been a combat vet. I've never been in the military, but I started learning about PTSD when I was working in an office with a guy who was a Marine. He was a psychologist, but he was a combat Marine in Vietnam. And so there was an occasion when I had read about this study that said that the difference between the expectation and the performance has a lot to do with how well people manage themselves afterwards. So I was telling this friend about that, and there was some other vets there with him when I was telling it, and I said, so I've kind of adjusted my expectation for my fantasies about how I would be in combat. And you know, my expectation had always been that had I gone to combat, that I would have performed well and heroically, and I would have done fine. And I've said, you know, I've given up that fantasy because it sounds too dangerous. You know, I think the fantasy that I have now about if I were to be in a life and death situation like that is I just would hope that I would survive and not shit my britches. And they looked around at each other, and they looked back at me, and they looked at each other, and they looked back at me, and they said, Bob, your expectations are much too high. And and that's the truth. And so as I started talking to more vets, you know, losing control is not an unusual experience, especially for first-time, engagements. And so I think we have no idea what we would do or how we would do in these situations until we've been there. And that's the difficulty with this, is knowing how are we going to perform. And I think there's a couple problems in our culture today. One is that we have so much violence on TV and in the movies and in our daily news, and portrays the world in such a violent way, and often does not show the pain. It doesn't show the hurt. You can't smell the blood. So we don't get a realistic sense of it. So we have this vision of how we're going to be or what violence really is. But until you've been in that experience, you don't know. And so you don't know how you can perform, you know. And then there's all these expectations that you get in your training about how you're going to perform, which I think are valuable and important. But then if you don't, it's very hard to live with yourself and to live with that.